Something magical happens when you chop 1 onion, when you peel 2 carrots and dice them in small chunks, and you add 2 stalks of celery. You add a little bit of oil, maybe a tablespoon of butter, and you begin to stir at medium heat. Then you add 1 little, I don't know how to say this word in English, 1 little stick of thyme. A little bit of 1 leaf of 1 bay leaf, yes. And you continue to stir, and the heat is still on. Suddenly the house begins to smell really yummy. Then you add some lentils. Then you add some stock. If you're vegetarian, you would add vegetable stock. If you're a meat eater, maybe chicken broth or something to that sort. Then you taste it to make sure that it has enough salt. If your stock didn't have salt, you make sure that you add just enough salt. Maybe you add some crushed pepper. If you like it a little spicy, you can add some chilies at this point. Then you put the cover and you lower the temperature and you let these lentils dance with all these lovely ingredients. And in about 45 minutes or so, you have a wonderful vegetable lentil soup. Now, if you've ever tried lentils by themselves, they're not very tasty. In fact, you could break a tooth. If you've ever had carrots by themselves, they're pretty tasty, but they're excellent when combined with onion and celery. In fact, the French have a name for this. Does anybody know what the French call onion, celery, and orange, and carrots? Does anybody know what they call it? I think it's called I don't want to butcher it, but it's maurepois or maurequois, something to that effect. But something magical happens when you mix all these ingredients together. By themselves, they're okay. But when they come together, wonderful things happen. I believe that the same thing happens when we work together as a team. Together, when we look around at each other, we're quite different. Some of us are a little salty. Did you get it? Little salty? Yeah. Some of us might be a little fiery. Usually the Hispanics, the Latinos, we like to say that we bring the spice to the group. Some of us are quiet, others are outgoing, some are introverted, some are extroverted. But when combined together, we make an amazing team. Kind of the way that if you just look at flour and you stick your finger in it and taste it, it's not tasty. But if you add some salt, if you add some olive oil, if you knead it together, you can make an amazing pizza crust and dough. And sure, when you have that dough, you have to beat it. And it looks like you're punching the dough, especially if you added yeast to it. You have to let all that air out and you're putting it all in. And then that pizza dough gets tossed up in the air and stretched. But when you start adding layers to it and you put some tomato sauce and some oregano and some cheese and all those other, or veggie cheese if you don't like melty cheese, whatever it is that you add on your pizza, when it comes together, it just works. And if you don't believe me, ask the kids. Who likes pizza? Exactly. Something wonderful happens when you bring it all together. And like so, each one of us are a different ingredient. We're part of a team together. When we're blended together, we can make something wonderful. Some of us are the cheese that stick people together, that make people and make those connections with one another. Some of us are kind of saucy, and we just give a little flavor. Other of us are like the pineapple, super tropical and tasty and sweet. Some of you are like the onions. You kind of have to have some sparingly. I'm not going to tell you what you are, but we each play a role in this. There is something to be said about bringing things together, bringing people together that maybe by themselves, But when you come together, wow. Same thing happens in an orchestra. When you look at each individual instrument, it's beautiful. Have you ever heard an orchestra when it's tuning? It doesn't sound very nice, does it? Someone has to begin. I think it's, I don't know if it's a flute, but eventually it's a violin, and everyone starts tuning, and it sounds kind of weird, and you're thinking, could anything good come from this? All of a sudden, the conductor stands in front, and everyone is watching and waiting, and they all have a sheet of music, and before you know it, they're making wonderful music together. And sure, there are soloists at different times, but together, it's wonderful. I believe that the church is the same way. I believe that God calls us to this place as a team, and together we can make beautiful music if we're being led by him. So the Bible tells us that Jesus needed a special work to be done. And so he went along the mountainside and he decided to pray, because all things should start with prayer. Mark chapter 3, verses 13 and on read, Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. So he called, they answered the call, and they were together. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. So he knew he had a special task for them to do. Before he chose the people, he spent time in prayer, got up from that prayer, called them, they answered the call, and he knew, before we do anything, before I send them out to accomplish the great task and purpose and mission, I need to spend time with them and prepare them. And so the Bible tells us that Jesus spent extra time with these disciples. Yes, he was healing and preaching and teaching and doing all of these wonderful things. But aside from doing that, he was pouring into this special group of 12 people. I want to suggest to you that God has called you to do something with a purpose. And he wants to pour into you so that you can go out with that mission and go forward with all authority. But for that to happen, you need to spend time with Jesus. I believe that each and every one of us here has a purpose and a meaning. And I believe that God has called us in our giftedness to accomplish these things. And there's a team around us, whether we're working in the church, in the college, at work, in our families. If you even look at it, the fact that the Godhead is a team says a lot. It's a team, Father, Spirit, Son. And together they accomplish great things. The creation of this world was accomplished in a team. And God is calling us to be part of his team. The question is, if you and I will be team players, if we will allow God to use us to make something beautiful, something fragrant, something that not only helps us and reaches us that are within these walls, but that extends, which is our community. So I want to invite you that before you go off to do what you need to do, that you spend some time and that you set that time apart to connect with the one who is sending you. May God bless you and be with you today.
You know, isn't that fantastic? Let me read to you from Luke chapter 22. A dispute arose among the disciples as to which of them was considered to be the greatest. Jesus had already talked to them about this. This is Luke 22. There's another section back in about Luke chapter 5 where he had to say, stop trying to figure out who's the greatest. Now he's giving them this lesson again. And then he gives the lesson again when he does the foot washing and reminds them to be a servant. There's something about the human nature that constantly wants us to rise up and be great, which there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But when it's greater and pushing someone else down, that's when it's kind of gone off track. And Jesus is turning things on its head. And like Martin Luther King Jr. said, this is a new definition of greatness. And Jesus said to them, the kings and the Gentiles, they lord it over them. And those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors, but you're not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. Can everybody say serve? For who is greater, the one who is at the table reclining or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as the one who serves. You know, the Bible tells us that we should respect authority and be good to those over us in position. And it's not as if God's saying disregard the way that the society is set up. But he's just saying at the end of the day, at the bottom line, if you want to make your life valuable and worthwhile, service is where it's at. And if you wanted to catch Jesus and see what he was up to on any given day, he was serving. And that does put things right on their head. You know, I was reading trying to get some good jokes together for the breakfast this morning, and everybody who was in there knows that I found the best jokes available. It was awesome, wasn't it? Anyway, I read this section, and there were all these jokes by a particular scientist, and he sort of summed up in one of his jokes the irony of this whole situation. And he goes, one of his jokes was, "I'd kill for a Nobel Peace Prize." And you know, doesn't that sum it up? On one hand, we really want to help others and do good, and on the other hand, we'd kill for that sort of prestige. What's going on there? And there's this battle within each one of us, and that's where Jesus can come in and help give a breakthrough. Because the Bible talks about this, that there is a battle in our hearts. And when we simply say, "Jesus, can you come in?" He lives in us. Jesus' Spirit actually lives in us, and he's the greatest servant of all. And you know in your hearts today that serving others is the right thing to do. You want to do it. In fact, our culture here at Macquarie and at Wallsend, we already do it. In fact, this is a culture of great servers. When I arrived here 3 years ago, I realized I walked through the doors of a church that loves to serve. And when I'm on a campus full of people who love to serve. And so in some ways, I'm preaching to the choir today. But I want to encourage you. You are on the right track. When you are serving others, you're being just like Jesus. Let me read to you Matthew 25. This is a beautiful thought. You're not being just like Jesus. When you serve someone else, Jesus takes it personally. You help another person, Jesus feels like you've just helped him. You know, as a dad, it's nice if you as a human being, it's nice if you give me a compliment or help me out. But if you come up to me and you told me that you've helped one of my children, that's even better. That means so much more to me. And so this is what it's like. When we help Jesus' children, that's everyone around us, he takes it personally. Listen to this. It's talking about when Jesus comes back. He's the king. Will say to those on his right, "Come you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was on campus, and you gave me a beautiful campus to learn in. I was on campus, and you helped me learn in class time. I was at the church, and you taught a Sabbath school lesson or served a drink or came in early to set up and turn on the air conditioner." Jesus says, "I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." He says, you're a parent and you got up in the middle of the night and you looked after your crying child for the 4th time. You're serving Jesus. You changed another nappy, you're serving Jesus. You're at school and you see a kid sitting on their own and you say, "Come and sit with us." You're serving Jesus. You're at work and you look out for the colleague over there who's struggling and you know it's going to slow you. I'm going to change this. I must have done it myself. Sorry about that. Thanks, Ben, for giving me microphone lessons. All right. I switched the button with my hand. You're at work and you know it's going to slow you down to help someone else, but you do it anyway because that you know they need a boost to keep up. And they'll be all right, but they just needed a leg up. You're serving Jesus when you do these things. You see your neighbor and they need help. You're busy, but you help them anyway. You're serving Jesus. He takes it personally. That love is not lost on him. No one else may see what you do. It may seem like it was a lost cause, but Jesus watches every ounce of energy you put in as a parent, and he loves you for it. and he's going to reward you for it. Jesus sees every ounce of energy you put in at work to do it to the best of your ability, to bring in some money to help look after your family. And he knows that when you get your paycheck, you don't just think about yourself. You're going to help others with some of that. He sees all of that. Nobody else may ever know anything about it, but God knows, and he's going to bless you for it. He loves you for it. We don't do it because he's going to bless us for it. We just do it because it's the right thing to do. But there's a blessing. It's more blessed to give than receive. And you know, sometimes we just don't realize that we're serving Jesus when we serve others. We don't realize how great we're being. We don't feel great because our name doesn't always get put up in lights. But the Bible says that God in heaven, your name is up in lights when you're serving. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go and visit you? The king replied, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me. I took that personally. I was in that moment. No one else saw it. You might have even forgotten about it, but it mattered in that moment, and it mattered to me. Friends, there's one more thought I want to share with you. You can't serve out of an empty cup, and Jesus wants to fill your cup. And today, some of us want to serve more, and we want to do better in our homes, in our workplaces, in our families. We want to be able to be more gracious and inclusive at school. We want to be more loving to our friends and family, but we feel like we've got limitations, and we do. We'll always only be human beings. We're not God. But you watch what happens when you invite God inside of you. He's going to take your love for service to another level. And he's going to take the power with which you can change lives to another level. And many of us already have experienced this every day, but there's always something extra with God. And there's something fantastic about what God has got planned for your life, and he's desperate that you discover it. And so today, as we come to a close, I want to pray with you. And I want to thank you, Pastor Lizeth, for your message this morning about the fact that we all have got to work together to get the sweetest result and fulfill what God has planned for us. And I want to encourage you to realize that you're the greatest when you're serving. You're just like Jesus when you're serving. He takes it personally. But don't do it all on your own. Let him fill your cup.